part, the press secretary has given conflicting information from what we're even hearing from Joe Biden, right? I mean, it's been all over the map in terms of his last physical exam and mental exam and when that happened. And then he said during the interview that, oh, actually, before the debate, he was checked out by doctors. He was tested for a virus, an infection. He didn't have one. I mean, we can't get a straight story out of the White House, right, in terms of him seeing a doctor. During the ABC interview, Biden was asked about how he'd feel in January if he loses the election to Trump. Here's what he said.
Oh.
And if you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do.
The goodest
That's what this
job.
is about.
Based.
So in your view, what will be Biden's legacy if he loses come November?
Pamela, when I heard that answer last night, I literally was drinking a glass of water. Thankfully, it was a plastic cup, and I threw the cup against the wall. Are you serious? Joe
Biden needs to commit to stealing the election again.
That Donald
Apparently
Trump
we've done
is
in the
an
past.
existential threat to our democracy. That if he's elected, we will lose our democracy. He will be a dictator. By the way, I believe that. And so George Stephanopoulos asked him, if you stay in and Trump wins, how will you feel? And he says, well, I'll feel like if I did my all and I gave it my best, I'll feel fine. Either he doesn't get it, or he hasn't been straightforward in what he believes about Trump. I think something's going to happen fast. And when I say fast, I think within a week or two, we're going to get a decision. But if Joe Biden doesn't get out there and show the American people still he's up for this, I don't know how he stops it.
Really quick, you said get a decision, because Biden's saying, hey, I'm not going anywhere. So what do you mean by that? You think he could change his mind?
He has to say that until he doesn't. Because if he didn't say that, then watch the barn door. Then everybody would have run from him.
Good talking point.
So he has to say that. But I do not believe there isn't a part of him and his advisors that know that may not be the case.
Well, it's interesting, too, because he had this call with campaign co-chairs, including Chris Coons, where he was apparently asking them for their thoughts on, the path forward. So that does indicate what you said, that he's still exploring, whether he should stay in or not. I've interviewed two Democratic House members on the show today. Neither of them are calling for Biden to step down. We should be very clear. But they do have different opinions about how the perception of Biden after the debate is sticking with voters. Take a listen.
We had a two-person majority, and the Senate was either one person or it was a 50-50 Senate. Extraordinary understanding of how to move the government.
All right, back to reading. Back to the boring time. The fuck? Oh. You don't want to talk about Biden anymore? About the most unquantifiable stuff versus the rest of the most unquantifiable stuff? No, this is like the most boring fucking conversation in the world. No, it's like, it's so hard to... Whatever the Democrats end up doing, they end up doing. I don't have a strong stance on it one way or another. $100 donation. Tell us you support and love America with your right hand on your heart. Awake and sleepy. I can't do that. I'm a Russian operative. Here's some money from Julum. Kidding. Just won 2 poker tournaments back to back. Decided to share. Hope that does not make me a tanky. Wow, good job. Would you bet on Biden to win? Yep, I still got money on him. We'll see what happens. This? Okay. On the slightly less unquantifiable side, do you not think there's a big risk of stuff like this coming out in October with names attached to it? Like if there's been an actual conspiracy to keep his health concerns private, that coming out seems like an existential risk? I don't think so, but who knows? We'll see. Paul's Ego and the Deep Fat Fried podcast called you out as a genocide denier on his subreddit and Twitter and said he was willing to debate or talk. Paul's Ego. Twitter. Oh boy. In a new open primary, why don't people consider how bad it'll be that news outlets will be pumping Democrats dunking and fighting on each other to a bunch of moderates? It just makes us look bad. It's why there's such a big advantage with an incumbent. Yeah, I know. It just seems like the Republicans will be wholly unified around Trump. We'll have a huge primary where people will be salty as fuck. Bro, the Democrats hated each other, or at least that was my recollection of it in 2008. Oof, those were some bad feelings. Obama and Clinton went hard on each other. But then who was on the other side, though? It was like McCain and then like fucking Palin, and I don't know. The Republicans didn't have a real... They fumbled hard. If there's a guy who wants to chat with me, tell him to shoot me a DM. My DMs are open. If Trump doesn't win, aren't we just doing this whole thing again in 4 years? What do you mean? Then we have an actual primary. I don't know if Trump would be up for running again in 4 years, but... Oh, Jesus. They have Demon Mama on. Based. In a statute designed to serve as the fundamental character of the administrative state, Congress surely would have articulated a similarly deferential standard applicable to questions of law had it intended to depart from the settled pre-APA understanding that deciding such questions was exclusively a judicial function. But nothing in the APA hints at such a dramatic departure. On the contrary, by directing courts to interpret constitutional and statutory provisions without differentiating between the two, Section 706 makes clear that agency interpretations of statutes, like agency interpretations of the Constitution, are not entitled to deference under the APA. It thus remains the responsibility of the court to decide whether the law means what the agency says. Footnote 4. The dissent observes that Section 706 does not expressly say that courts are to decide legal questions using a de novo standard of review. That much is true. Hold on, what does this mean again? De novo. Will there be a Bridges conversation with Kyla Scanlon? Yeah, we recorded that yesterday or the day before. De novo. Oh, like a whole new decision, basically. Jesus. Okay. But statutes can be sensibly understood only by reviewing text in context. Since the start of our republic, courts have decided questions of law and interpreted constitutional and statutory provisions by applying their own legal judgment. Setting aside its misplaced reliance on Gray and Hurst, the dissent does not and could not deny that tradition, but it nonetheless insists that to codify that tradition, to codify that tradition, Congress needed to expressly reject a sort of deference the courts had never before applied and would not apply for several decades to come. It did not. The notion that some things go without saying applies to legislation just as it does to everyday life. The text of the APA means what it says, and a look at its history, if anything, only underscores that plain meaning. According to both the House and Senate reports on the legislation, Section 706 provided that questions of law are for courts rather than agencies to decide in the last analysis. Some of the legislation's most prominent supporters articulated the same view. Even the Department of Justice, an agency with every incentive to endorse a view of the APA favorable to the executive branch, opined after its enactment that Section 706 merely restated that present law as to the scope of judicial review. That present law, as we have described, adhered to the traditional conception of the judicial function. Roberts, this argument seems much more grounded than the immunity bullshit, or it seems as such. But we'll see how the dissent argues against this. Various respected commentators contemporaneously maintained that the APA required reviewing courts to exercise independent judgment on questions of law. Professor John Dickinson, for example, read the APA to impose a clear mandate that all questions of law shall be decided by the reviewing court itself and in the exercise of its own independent judgment. Administrative Procedure Act. Professor Bernard Schwartz noted that Section 706 would seem to be merely a legislative restatement of the familiar review principle that questions of law are for the reviewing court, at the same time leaving to the courts the task of determining in each case what are questions of law. And Professor Louis Jaffe, who had served in several agencies at the advent of the New Deal, thought that Section 706 leaves it up to the reviewing court to decide as a question of law whether there is discretion in the premises, that is, whether the statute at issue delegates particular discretionary authority to an agency. The APA, in short, incorporates the traditional understanding of the judicial function under which courts must exercise independent judgment in determining the meaning of statutory provisions. In exercising such judgment, though, courts may, as they have from the start, seek aid from the interpretations of those responsible for implementing particular statutes. Such interpretations constitute a body of experience and informed judgment to which courts and litigants may properly resort for guidance, consistent with the APA. And interpretations issued contemporaneously with the statute at issue, and which have remained consistent over time, may be especially useful in determining the statute's meaning. If Biden drops out and Kamala steps out, Newsom steps in, Republicans and Democrats have a new age of prosperity. Newsom versus DeSantis, the new renaissance. Sorry, nice. Okay. In a case involving an agency, of course, the statute's meaning may well be that the agency is authorized to exercise a degree of discretion. Congress has often enacted such statutes. For example, some statutes expressly delegate to an agency the authority to give meaning to a particular statutory term. Others empower an agency to prescribe rules to fill up the details of a statutory scheme, or to regulate subject to the limits imposed by a term or phrase that leaves agencies with flexibility, such as appropriate or reasonable. I feel like everything I've read so far seems reasonable. I don't know what the huge disagreements are with this, or maybe as applied. I'm not sure. I don't know. We'll find out, I guess. When the best reading of a statute is that it delegates discretionary authority to an agency, the role of the reviewing court under the APA is, as always, to independently interpret the statute and effectuate the will of Congress subject to constitutional limits. The court fulfills that role by recognizing constitutional delegations, fixing the boundaries of the delegated authority, and ensuring the agency has engaged in reasoned decision-making within those boundaries. By doing so, a court upholds the traditional conception of the judicial function that the APA adopts. The deference that Chevron requires the court's reviewing agency action cannot be squared with the APA. Did Chevron require deference? Let's see. The courts must then determine if the answer is no in the first part, if the executive interpretation of Congress order is permissible based on the legislative statutes. Did Chevron demand deference, or does he think that it was just too weighted, or I'm not sure. Wait, the fuck is this? Can confirm, please. Confirm what? Oh, good one. Okay. In the decades between the enactment of the APA and this court's decision in Chevron, courts generally continued to review agency interpretations of the statutes they administer by independently examining each statute to determine its meaning. Okay, in the decades between... Okay, I need it. Between the enactment of the APA and this court's decision in Chevron, courts generally continue to review agency interpretations. Okay, courts generally continue to review agency interpretations of the statutes they administer by independently examining each statute to determine its meaning. Is a statute, specifically speaking, so statutes are from legislation in Congress, would an entire bill be considered one statute? Or does the bill enact many statutes? Is statutes like under the criminal code, is it just like the first section? Would that be considered like a statute? What is a statute? Strict definition of a statute. U.S. Congress. Not statute. Laws written and enacted by regulations also referred to as rules that are by agencies to supplement laws. Huh. Maybe it doesn't matter that much. I guess they're all statutes, I guess. Whatever, okay. Wait, I think I might sneeze. Wait, maybe not. Fuck. Oh my god, I was about to. Okay, never mind. As an early proponent and later critic of Chevron recounted, courts during this period have thus identified delegations of discretionary authority to agencies on a statute-by-statute basis. Chevron decided in 1984 by a bare quorum of 6 justices triggered a marked departure from the traditional approach. The question in this case was whether an EPA regulation allowing states to treat all of the pollution emitting devices within the same industrial grouping. Why does he say that? Like, it's just an irritating phrase. If it was an 8-1 decision or a 9-0 decision, would he be treating this differently, or? Or when he says by 6 justices were deciding that, were there only 6 justices on the Supreme Court in 1984, or? Was there like some wild shit happening? No, okay. Three justices didn't participate in the decision. Oh, okay. Maybe that's okay. Okay. The question in the case is whether an EPA regulation allowing states to treat all of the pollution emitting devices within the same industrial grouping as though they were encased within a single bubble was consistent with the term stationary source as used in the Clean Air Act. Chevron decided. Okay. The question in that case was whether an EPA regulation allowing states to treat all the pollution is consistent with the term stationary source. Okay. To answer that question of statutory interpretation, the court articulated and employed a now familiar two-step approach broadly applicable to review of agency action. The first step was to discern whether Congress had directly spoken to the precise question at issue. The court explained that if the intent of Congress is clear, then it is the end of the matter. And courts were therefore to reject administrative constructions which are contrary to clear congressional intent. The court explained that if the intent of Congress is clear, it's the end of the matter. Courts therefore to reject administrative. Okay, yes, true. To discern such intent, the court noted, a reviewing court was to employ traditional tools of statutory construction. I had no idea what that means. Like, what are traditional tools of statutory construction? But without mentioning the APA or acknowledging any doctrinal shift, the court articulated a second step applicable when Congress had not directly addressed the precise question at issue. In such a case, that is a case in which the statute was silent or ambiguous with respect to the specific issue at hand, a reviewing court could not simply impose its own construction on the statute, as would be necessary in the absence of an administrative interpretation. A court instead had to set aside the traditional interpretive tools and defer to the agency if it had offered a permissible construction of the statute. A court instead had to set aside the traditional interpretive tools and defer to the agency if it had offered a permissible... Okay. Even if not, the reading the court would have reached if the question initially had arisen in a judicial proceeding. Hold on. I can't have fucking music with lyrics. Where's my non-lyrics music? Court instead had to set aside the traditional interpretive tools and defer to the agency if it had offered a permissible construction of the statute. Even if not, the reading the court would have reached if the question initially had arisen in a judicial proceeding. That directive was justified, according to the court, by the understanding that administering statutes requires the formulation of policy to fill statutory gaps, by the long judicial tradition of according considerable weight to executive branch interpretations, and by a host of other considerations, including the complexity of the regulatory scheme. EPA's detailed and reasoned consideration, the policy-laden nature of the judgment supposedly the judgment supposedly required, and the agency's indirect accountability to the people through the president. Okay. Okay, I understand. So this is probably going to be like the meat of the of this case is probably this part, I'm guessing. So what's happening here is if Congress hasn't addressed the issue directly through a statute, right, which is laws passed from Congress, and the executive agency has made a regulation, which somebody's challenging, the reviewing court, according to Chevron, wasn't allowed to impose its own construction on the statute, meaning that the court can't decide, well, how should the statute be determined? Instead, the court looks to the executive, and the court says, okay, well, how have you done it? And is that a permissible construction of the statute? Even if that's not the way we would have construed it, as long as you have a permissible construction, we'll let it stand. How could you be opposed to that? That feels reasonable. But I'm guessing Roberts is going to argue against that. That directive was justified, according to the court, by the understanding that administering statutes. This, sorry, fuck, I just had so many thoughts pop into my mind. I'm sorry, there's a huge powers question here, because it feels like what happened, I'm making judgments of, or assumptions of what Roberts is going to go on to argue. Absent this framework, it feels like the court is grabbing for itself. It's taking from the executive the power to figure out what what a regulation should look like. That somebody could theoretically challenge the executive's interpretation of a statute, and the court should be able to say, with novel reasoning, meaning the court uses its own reasoning without looking at how the regulation is, how the regulation is done, that the court gets to decide. The court gets to decide what that regulation should look like. There's got to be another test or something substituted, though, because that feels like a really big power grab from the executive. Unless the court's just going to say, the court's just going to strike all of it. That's what Roberts is going to say. The court is just going to say that that's why they can't do anything. Thank you. I love you. Did that make sense? Did what I just say make sense? Huh, okay. Employing this new test, the court concluded that Congress had not addressed the question at issue with the necessary level of specificity and that the EPA's interpretation was entitled to deference. I want to read that quote. What case are they borrowing from here? This is from Chevron, I'm assuming, right? That must be, because he's talking to... Okay, I just want to see this real quick. Chevron ruling. SupremeCourt.gov. Before 2023. Oh, is it this? Chevron USA versus, what the fuck is the name of the, okay, 1984. This is it. Okay. Okay. This top part is the syllabus. Okay. In addition, respondents argue that the legislative history and policy of the act were closed. The plant-wide definition of the EPA's interpretation is not entitled to deference because it represents a sharp break with prior interpretation of the act. Okay. The arguments over policy that are advanced in the parties' briefs create the impression that respondents are now waging in a judicial forum a specific policy battle, which they ultimately lost in the agency and in the 32 jurisdictions opting for the bubble concept, but one which was never waged in the Congress. Such policy arguments are more properly addressed to legislators or administrators, not to judges. In these cases, the administrator's interpretation represents a reasonable accommodation of manifestly competing interest and is entitled to deference. The regulatory scheme is technical and complex. The agency considered the matter in a detailed and reasoned fashion, and the decision involves reconciling conflicting policies. Congress intended to accommodate both interests, but did not do so itself on the level of specificity presented by these cases. Perhaps that body consciously desired the administrator to strike the balance at this level, thinking that those with great expertise and charged with responsibility for administering the provision would be in a better position to do so. Perhaps it simply did not consider the question at this level, and perhaps Congress was unable to forge a coalition in either side of the question, and those on each side decided to take their chances with the scheme devised by the agency for judicial purposes. It matters not which of these things occurred. Judges are not experts in the field, true, and are not part of either political branch of the government. Courts must, in some cases, reconcile competing political interests, but not on the basis of the judge's personal policy preferences. How does... Okay, so this is the big thing that I'm going to want to hear Robert say. He has to speak on this. I want to know how Roberts thinks the court ought to construct a regulation from a statute. I need to hear that. That's really important. I hope he goes into great detail, or at least provides a good level of guidance for how a court ought to do that, because otherwise that's a really spooky process. but okay. I think he wants Congress to clarify, so that's impossible. Or at least my understanding so far is I don't think that's possible, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll keep reading and find out what he says. Wait. It did not matter why Congress, as the court saw it, had not squarely addressed the question, or that the agency had from time to time changed its interpretation. The latest EPA interpretation was a permissible reading of the Clean Air Act, so under the court's new rule, that reading controlled. Initially, Chevron seemed destined to obscurity. The court did not at first treat it as the watershed decision it was fated to become. Oh, cool. More watershed overturning. It was hardly cited in cases involving statutory questions of agency authority. But within a few years, both this court and the courts of appeals were routinely invoking its two-step framework as the governing standard in such cases. As the court did so, it revisited the doctrine's justifications. Eventually, the court decided that Chevron rested on a presumption that Congress, when it left ambiguity in a statute meant for implementation by an agency, understood that the ambiguity would be resolved first and foremost by the agency, and desired the agency, rather than the courts, to possess whatever degree of discretion the ambiguity allows. That seems like a reasonable assumption to me. That seems like a very reasonable assumption to me. Why would we ever assume different? When Congress leaves things up to vagueness for a law, they would expect that, oh, the Supreme Court will sort that out? That sounds like a wild assumption to me. Okay, fuck. I'm going to eat. We're going to watch a video real quick. Fuck. I was hoping I could side with the conservatives on this, so I'm sounding like a partisan hack. Don't worry. I'm sure Roberts is going to give us some wildly good justification soon, okay? Give me something to watch. One second. I got an iron and an ironing board. I'm going to iron all my clothes now. Have you ever seen a thing that, like, when you set it on fire, it instantly goes... Whoosh? Bro, I turned that iron up to the max. I went to iron one of my t-shirts, and that thing just disintegrated, okay? Holy shit. Don't use the cotton setting on synthetic material. I thought that shit was just a meme. It is not a meme. Oh, you know what we should watch? Because this comes up so many fucking times. Yeah. 3-minute video. Wait, really? Oh, look, our Sabine lady describes this.
we know that the way Today I want to explain how we know that the way Einstein thought about gravity cannot be correct. Einstein's idea was that gravity...
Wait, what? Why don't they give me a spoon for this? I really need a... What's she gonna say? Wait, why is general relativity incorrect? It can't be quite right. Oh boy.
is not a force, but it is really an effect caused by the curvature of space and time. Matter curves space-time in its vicinity, and this curvature in return affects how matter moves. This means that, according to Einstein, space and time are responsive. They deform in the presence of matter, and not only matter, but all types of energies, including pressure and momentum flux and so on. Einstein called his theory general relativity because it's a generalization of special relativity. Both are based on observer independence, that is, the idea that the laws of nature should not depend on the motion of an observer. The difference between general relativity and special relativity is that in special relativity, space-time is flat, like a sheet of paper, while in general relativity it can be curved, like the often named rubber sheet. General relativity is an extremely well-confirmed theory. It predicts, for example, that light rays bend around massive objects like the Sun, which we have observed. The same effect also gives rise to gravitational lensing, which we have also observed. General relativity further predicts that the universe should expand, which it does. It predicts that time runs more slowly in gravitational potentials, which is correct. General relativity predicts black holes, and it predicts just how the black hole shadow looks like, which is what we have observed. It also predicts gravitational waves, which we have observed, and the list goes on. So there is no doubt that general relativity works extremely well. But we already know that it cannot ultimately be the correct theory for space and time. It is an approximation that works in many circumstances but fails in others. We know this because general relativity does not fit together with another extremely well-confirmed theory, that is quantum mechanics. It's one of these problems that's easy to explain but extremely difficult to solve. Here's what goes wrong if you want to combine gravity and quantum mechanics. We know experimentally that particles have some strange quantum properties. They obey the uncertainty principle, and they can do things like being in two places at the same time. Concretely, think about an electron going through a double slit. Quantum mechanics tells us that the particle goes through both slits at the same time. Now, electrons have a mass, and masses generate a gravitational pull by bending space-time. This brings up the question, to which place does the gravitational pull go if the electron travels through both slits at the same time? You would expect the gravitational pull to also go to two places at the same time. But this cannot be the case in general relativity because general relativity is not a quantum theory.
Wait, does the gravity go to both places at the same time? Is that true?
To solve this problem, we have to understand the quantum properties of gravity. We need what physicists call a theory of quantum gravity. And since Einstein taught us that gravity is really about the curvature of space and time, what we need is a theory for the quantum properties of space and time. There are two other reasons how we know that general relativity can't be quite right. Besides the double slit problem, there is the issue with singularities in general relativity. Singularities are places where both the curvature and the energy density of matter become infinitely large. At least that's what general relativity predicts. This happens, for example, inside black holes and at the beginning of the universe. In any other theory that we have, singularities are a sign that the theory breaks down and has to be replaced by a more fundamental theory. And we think the same has to be the case in general relativity, where the more fundamental theory to replace it is quantum gravity. The third reason we think that gravity must be quantized is the trouble with information lost in black holes. If we combine quantum theory with general relativity but without quantizing gravity, then we find that black holes slowly shrink by emitting radiation. This was first derived by Stephen Hawking in the 1970s, and so this radiation is also called Hawking radiation. Now it seems that black holes can entirely vanish by emitting this radiation. Problem is, the radiation itself is entirely random and does not carry any information besides the temperature. So when the black hole is entirely gone and all you have left is this radiation, you do not know what formed the black hole. Such a process is fundamentally irreversible and therefore incompatible with quantum theory. It just does not fit together. And a lot of physicists think that to solve this problem, we need a theory of quantum gravity. So this is how we know that general relativity has to be replaced by a theory of quantum gravity. This problem has been known since the 1930s. Since then, a lot of attempts have been made.
They knew this problem since the 30s and they kept it hidden from us? What?
This problem has been known since the 1930s. Since then, a lot of attempts have been made to solve it. I will tell you about this some other time, so don't forget to subscribe.
Wow, anybody else mastered relativity now? Thank you. Okay, never mind. I'm not going to say that. Okay. There we go. Who is the legal counsel for the president when making military decisions like drone striking a target, or do they have an official title? I could be wrong, but I think it's the Office of Legal Counsel. The Office of Legal Counsel. I think that these are supposed to be the people who by delegation from the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel provides legal advice to the President and all executive branch agencies. This is supposed to be the office that, if let's say the President is like, I really want to do, something. Am I actually breaking the law? Am I doing something incorrect here? He can confer with the Office of Legal Counsel to give him guidance on whether or not this thing would be, well, I guess we're not talking about breaking laws anymore. Actually, I don't even know what the fuck they would even confer on now. I guess to see if it would survive a Supreme Court challenge, but yeah, I guess it would see for executive actions and stuff, like would this survive, I guess, I don't know. Destiny clip. What? Last clip.
Just give them the bomb for being men? Yo. That's real.
What? Hold up. Don't do that. What you just did is what's driving left men to the right. Just because they're men, you're like, oh, fuck them. And that's why a lot of guys right now, especially young guys, are looking towards like masculine, toxic ones.
Wait, what?
Just give them the bomb for being men? Yo. That's real.
What? Hold up. Don't do that.
I don't understand. Just give them the bomb for being men? Like, you're the bomb. Or like give them a bomb in a video game? Or like give them a real life bomb and they get exploded? Or...
What you just did is what's driving left men to the right. Just because they're men, you're like, oh, fuck.
Oh, the bomb hot sauce. Oh, or fourth option. Okay.
And that's why a lot of guys right now, especially young guys, are looking towards like masculine, toxic ones for guidance because there's not a lot of ones on the left because of casual comments like that. We can put that out there. I still support, women's right and LGBT and all that good stuff. But I want to try to avoid driving away more young, impressionable men. That wasn't on you. It was on the person who made that comment.
Oh man, men are trash. Just give them the
To the right. Click one. Women's right and LGBT and all that good. That comment.
Oh man, men are trash. Anyways, I'm gonna start putting this on.
I just wanted to see her response to it. I don't disagree with what Toast was saying. I don't even mind her joke, and I don't want to condemn her character because I don't know anything about her. But I will say, it is very triggering when the jokes can only go one way. I think I've said this story before, but I remember like in high school, I lost so many friends. There was a huge thing that happened where there was a really fat girl in our friend group, and the other girls would always like kind of like joke about how skinny one of my friends were. He's like, oh yeah, like, you know, Brianna would, you know, she's way too much for this guy, blah, 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 blah. And my other friend was like super skinny, and Brianna was really fat, but it was like a empowering thing. And I think at one point, I think I'd made like a joke, and I was something that's like, oh, you know, he's probably happier for it, you know, because I'm pretty sure he would actually be crushed to death if this woman were to even look at him. And I think it was a huge rift in our group, and it was like, I think I lost like 3 or 4 friends permanently after that. But yeah, I was thinking like, well, why you can make fun of us, and me too. You made fun of us all the time for being like skinny. Why? It seems kind of weird. I don't know. It was fucking annoying. This was back in like 2004. Jesus. Most of the time I hang around any femme friend group, they constantly shit on men, and it's super alienating. Yeah, I don't mind, like, shitting on men. I think it can be funny. But, like, that means I get to shit on women, too. As long as we all understand we're all joking. But I think it's a huge, huge, huge red flag that if they shit on men constantly and you shit on women and they get, like, really upset about it, like, oh, wait, well, that's not funny. But wait, hold on, wait. So you being honest then when you shit on men? Are you not joking then? Because if I can't do it because apparently I'm not joking, then you're not, like, I don't know, fuck that. Fuck that. Okay. Neither Chevron nor any subsequent decision of this court attempted to reconcile this framework with the APA. The law of deference that this court has built on the foundation laid in Chevron has instead been heedless of the original design of the APA. Chevron defies the command of the APA that the reviewing court, not the agency whose action it reviews, is to decide all relevant questions of law and interpret statutory provisions. It requires the court to ignore, not follow, the reading the court would have reached had it exercised its independent judgment as required by the APA. I really don't understand that. Oh, don't do this to me. I must be missing something. It requires the court to ignore, not follow, the reading the court would have reached had it exercised its independent judgment as required by the APA. But Chevron is not the court, how the court would construct it legally. It would just be like a regulatory construction of the, statutory construction. It would be a regulatory construction of the statute, or a statutory construction referring to the regulation. That part of Chevron didn't sound like a legal analysis per se, whereas this court is making it sound like the court has to ignore the legal analysis just because the court might recognize deference to a construction of the statute. It would be statutory construction, would be the regulation. That's wild. This seems like a huge power grab for the court, right? Like, this is supposed to be the executive's job to do. Why would we prefer ever? Because it sounds like what you're basically saying is the court has first dibs on statutory construction, which is it is the most like within the executive, obviously. This is the whole reason why, like at this point, or with this thing, why would we even have an executive branch? If the court essentially gets the deferred reading of, or almost first pass on, I don't know. Well, I don't know, man. We'll see what Robert says. I don't understand it at all. Or it can't be that dumb, but we'll see. And although exercising independent judgment is consistent with the respect historically given to executive branch interpretations, Chevron insists on much more. It demands that courts mechanically afford binding deference to agency interpretations, including those that have been inconsistent over time. Okay. Still worse, it forces courts to do so even when a pre-existing judicial precedent holds that the statute means something else, unless the prior court happened to also say that the statute is unambiguous. That's fair. Wouldn't you say that, like, a court could say, hold on, you can't ban dicks, okay, just because you're allowed to ban guns, okay? That's bullshit, right? A court could say that to ban, like, a person banning dick guns, but then somebody else might ban a different type of gun, and the court might have a slightly different decision on it. But, like, ultimately, the interpretation, or at least the execution, is supposed to be with the executive, right? I don't think the court interpreting things differently or having different opinions on things over time speaks at all to that. Especially if they even qualified it by saying, well, if the court says there's an unambiguous meaning here, then fine, then it's closed. That would be a good caveat to that. That regime is the antithesis of the time-honored approach the APA prescribes. In fretting over the prospect of allowing a judicial interpretation of a statute to override an agency's in a dispute before the court, In fretting over the prospect of allowing a judicial interpretation of a statute to override an agency's in a dispute before the court, Chevron turns the statutory scheme for judicial review of agency action upside down. Chevron cannot be reconciled with the APA, as the government and the dissent contend, by presuming that statutory ambiguities are implicit delegations to agencies, as opposed to what? Implicit delegations to the court? See brief for response. Okay. Presumptions have their place in statutory interpretation, but only to the extent that they approximate reality. Chevron's presumption does not, because an ambiguity is simply not a delegation of law interpreting power. Chevron confuses the two. Okay, maybe. As Chevron itself noted, ambiguities may result from an inability on the part of Congress to squarely answer the question at hand, or from a failure to even consider the question with the requisite precision. In neither case does an ambiguity necessarily reflect a congressional intent that an agency, as opposed to a court, resolve the resulting interpretive question. And many, or perhaps more, and many, or perhaps most statutory ambiguities may be unintentional. As the framers recognized, ambiguities will inevitably follow from the complexity of objects, the imperfection of the human faculties, and the simple fact that no language is so copious as to supply words and phrases for every complex idea. Okay, not to be like a cuck, like I've read one decision, so it matters for everything else, okay? But like, what about having like a vigorous and energetic executive? Like, how hamstrung would you be as an executive if every single time an agency had to make a decision on anything that was even slightly ambiguous, you just assume that you have no ability to rule there, or you have no ability to implement there? Every single time a decision comes up, it's like, well, fuck, did they literally write this down word for word in the law passed by Congress? Nope. Oh, guess we can't do fuck all about it. That feels not very vigorous. Courts, after all, routinely confront statutory ambiguities in cases having nothing to do with Chevron, cases that do not involve agency interpretations or delegations of authority. Of course, when faced with a statutory ambiguity in such a case, the ambiguity is not a delegation to anybody, and a court is not somehow relieved of its obligation to independently interpret the statute. Courts in that situation do not throw up their hands because Congress's instructions have supposedly run out, leaving a statutory gap. Courts instead understand that such statutes, no matter how impenetrable, do, in fact, must have a single best meaning. That is the whole point of having written statutes. Every statute's meaning is fixed at the time of enactment. I don't know if this is a major complaint or if it's just me being silly, but when you're talking about overturning like watershed decisions, I don't appreciate citations to very recent court cases. But not, you know, that's not like a big role. And also, who the fuck am I? Who cares? But I would prefer that most of the citations are quite old here if we're talking about overturning like watershed legislation. But I don't know. Okay. Or Supreme Court rulings, I should say. So instead of declaring a particular party's reading permissible in such a case, courts use every tool at their disposal to determine the best reading of the statute and resolve the ambiguity. In an agency case, that's pretty important, I guess. I should make this red. I should take notes on this. So, I don't need to put Roberts claims. Well, no, I should. Roberts claims that court should be in charge of reading explicitly how a statute is intended by constructing that contention solely on their own without any deference to executive implementation or interpretation. In an agency case, as in any other, though, if some judges might or might not consider the statute ambiguous, there is a best reading all the same, the reading the court would have reached if no agency were involved. Oh man, fuck, wait, hold on. I'm not liking this so much more. I'm sorry. I incorrectly stated earlier that the court is, in a way, they're snatching power, like you would imagine to be the sole function of the executive. They're snatching power from the executive. However, the court could also be snatching power from the legislative as well, where the court could arguably, he needs to talk about how the court constructs things, because arguably, I don't think this would happen because it would be really wild, but arguably the court could write something where the court passes a law and says, we are going to ban all spoons. And then the executive goes to implement this law, and they're like, okay, well, when they said spoons, they probably meant like ladles and like big soup spoons, stuff like that as well, right? So they go to ban that, and then somebody challenges that somebody challenges that. And like, hold on, this guy is trying to ban soup ladles. That's not a fucking spoon. Nobody's reading this. And then the Supreme Court goes to review it, and the Supreme Court goes, actually, well, forget what the executive said. We don't even care. We think that the best construction is they actually meant to ban like spooning. Like cuddle spooning. So we're going to toss this back to the executive. Your interpretation was totally fucking wrong, by the way. We're going to say that's not good now. And we're going to say the best way to construct this law was banning this. Theoretically, it gives the court the ability in some ambiguous instances to provide their own first interpretation and then basically delegate that to the executive, which sounds really wholly inappropriate. But we'll see what Robert says. Robert said that the APA gives the court the power to decide the regulation. Did you see what part of the APA he was talking about? No, I've read the APA, but it sounds like what Roberts is saying, and I'm sure this is probably what it is if you go and read it, is that the APA says the court obviously still gets to regulate on matters of like statutory law. Obviously, nobody would say that it should be taken from there, and the APA would never delegate away from that. However, I doubt that the APA is meaning to give the court as much power as Roberts is assuming. Roberts is basically saying that, oh, look, the APA said we still get to decide matters of law. And that also means that by a matter of law, we get to make a first pass at constructing any given regulation from a statute, which instead of deferring it all to an executive, like a legitimate executive. Because one of the things that's bothering me about this so far is that it's not like the court is saying if the executive has constructed it in an unreasonable way, right? If the court said that, I'd be like, okay, sure. If the executive had a wild interpretation, that's fine. But he's saying that even if the executive has interpreted the statute in a reasonable way, if it's not how we would have interpreted it, we reject the executive construction. That seems wild to me. Why do you think that a court would be any more likely than the executive agency to make such an interpretation? Well, they shouldn't. They're not supposed to be. Statutory interpretation is squarely within the executive. That's what the executive does. That's the whole point of it, is to take a statute and then to figure out a way to implement it into law or as a regulation and then to enforce it, right? Tell Tron to join. Join what? I haven't even finished... Destiny, this is meant to stop unreasonable interpretation? Then why didn't they say that? They didn't say unreasonable interpretation. You're using language that's not in the opinion. But I've only read like up to fucking 30 pages, so fuck me. Hold on. In an agency case as in any other, though, if some judges might or might not consider the statute ambiguous, there is a best reading all the same. The reading the court would have reached if no agency were involved. It therefore makes no sense to speak of a permissible interpretation that is not the one the court, after applying all relevant interpretive tools, concludes as best. In the business of statutory interpretation, if it is not the best, it is not permissible. Interesting. That's... That seems like a wildly unconstitutional statement to me. I'm so... Oh, I need to fight with pro-Chevron people after. That's unreal. In the business of statutory interpretation, if it is not the best, it is not permissible. He speaks as though best can be a universal objective fact. The reality here is that the court and the executive might have a disagreement on what the best interpretation is for the implementation of a particular thing. And here Roberts is saying the court gets the first and final say at that, which is not the job of the court at all. But, okay, in my opinion. Perhaps most fundamentally, this is a 6-3, I assume, again, right? Perhaps most fundamentally, Chevron's presumption is misguided because agencies have no special competence in resolving statutory ambiguities. Okay. Courts do. Okay. I must be misunderstanding something. He'll write more. The framers, as noted, anticipated that courts would often confront statutory ambiguities and expected that courts would resolve them by exercising independent legal judgment. And even Chevron itself reaffirmed that the judiciary is the final authority in issues of statutory construction and recognized that in the absence of an administrative interpretation, it is necessary for a court to impose its own construction on the statute. But this says in the absence of an administrative interpretation. However, Chevron also says in the presence of one that we feel is fairly constructed or permissible construction. I don't know why. Oh, I also don't like it when he cites cases that also like argue the opposite thing. But maybe, I mean, you can. I just say things I don't like. Who the fuck cares? Who knows? Maybe it's common practice. Chevron gravely erred, though, in concluding that the inquiry is fundamentally different just because an administrative interpretation is in play. Well, of course it would be. The very point of the traditional tools of statutory construction, the tools courts use every day, is to resolve statutory ambiguities. That is no less true when the ambiguity is about the scope of an agency's own power, perhaps the occasion on which abdication in favor of the agency is least appropriate. Destiny. We have stated time and time again that the courts must presume that a legislature says in a statute what it means and means in a statute what it says there. When the words of a statute are unambiguous, then, the first canon is also the last. Judicial inquiry is complete. I don't know what you're citing me this for or what this is supposed to... I think Roberts and me and the dissenters would all agree with that statement. If there's something unambiguous from the legislature, then yeah, of course. But that's not what we're talking about right now, right? The government responds that Congress must generally intend for agencies to resolve statutory ambiguities because agencies have subject matter expertise regarding the statutes that they administer, because deferring to agencies purportedly promotes the uniform construction of federal law, and because resolving statutory ambiguities can involve policymaking best left to political actors rather than courts. The dissent offers more of the same, but none of these considerations justifies Chevron's sweeping presumption of congressional intent. Beginning with expertise, we recently noted that interpretive issues arising in connection with a regulatory scheme may fall more naturally into a judge's bailiwick than an agency's. What is Kisser referring to there? I don't trust any... Roberts is like the Finkelstein of the court. Hold on, I don't trust any of his... I'm just curious what it says. Okay, Kisser, we are in volume 588. Of course, another recent opinion. Good one. Oh, fuck. Well, in that case, he probably does know what they meant because he probably fucking wrote it. Oh, hold on. Oh, Kagan authored this one? Fuck, we fucked up. Okay, let me just read this paragraph from this. Next, the agency's interpretation must in some way implicate its substantive expertise. Administrative knowledge and experience largely account for the presumption that Congress delegates interpretive lawmaking power to the agency. So the basis for deference ebbs when the subject matter of the dispute is distant from the agency's ordinary duties or falls within the scope of another agency's authority. That's super fair. This court indicated as much when it analyzed a split enforcement scheme in which Congress divided regulatory power between two entities to decide whose reasonable interpretation of a rule controlled. We presumed Congress intended to invest interpretive power in whichever actor was best positioned to develop expertise about the given problem. The same idea holds good as between agencies and courts. Generally, agencies have a nuanced understanding of the regulations they administer. The brief law. That point is most obvious when a rule is technical. Think back to our moiety, or diagnosis examples, but more prosaic seeming questions about commonly implicated policy expertise. Consider the TSA assessing the security risks of pate, or a disabilities office weighing the costs and benefits of an accommodation. Once again, though, there are limits. Some interpretive issues may fall naturally into a judge's bailiwick. Take one requiring the elucidation of a simple common law property term, or one concerning the award of an attorney's fee. Declining to award Chevron deference when an agency interprets a judicial review provision. When the agency has no comparative expertise in resolving a regulatory ambiguity, Congress presumably would not grant it that authority. Okay, so this makes sense. So Roberts' quote here, where Roberts is saying that, beginning with expertise, we recently noted that interpretive issues arising in connection with a regulatory scheme often, he puts often first, often may fall more naturally into a judge's bailiwick than in agencies. Yes, in matters where they're being tasked with interpreting like law or like a prior Supreme Court decision, which is what it says in this case for Keysore, but not in construction of, not in statutory construction. In my mind, that is a wildly inappropriate quote, but okay. We thus observed that when the agency has no comparative... Oh, he goes on to say, I should read his full thing before critiquing it. I'm sorry. We thus observed that when the agency has no comparative expertise in resolving a regulatory ambiguity, Congress presumably would not grant it the authority. Chevron's broad rule of deference, though, demands that courts presume just the opposite. Under that rule, ambiguities of all stripes trigger deference. Indeed, the government Indeed, the government and seemingly the dissent continue to defend the proposition that Chevron applies even in cases having little to do with the agency's technical subject matter expertise. Is that true? See brief for respondents in number 22. Okay, what do they say here? Hold on. Brief for respondents in number 22, 12, 19. Page 17. Wait, what? Oh my God, fuck me. Okay, see, brief for respondents. Fuck. Okay, I don't know what I'm looking at. This is a docket, right? Okay, so I'm looking at we're trying to find the, see, brief for respondents in number 22, 12, 19. That's referring to this case, right? I think, right? Why don't you have... Page 17, post at 10. Fuck. I'm not going to be able to find this.